Good morning or midday to those who are joining us for FSMA Fridays. Hard to believe that October is already here. It's certainly been a busy month on the FSMA front, and just in general, lots of things to share today. So delighted of the many people that are logging on, and welcome to FSMA Fridays. My name is Jill Bender. For many of those, I see lots of regular folks join us. Thank you, as always. We'll look forward to this session, but before we begin, my usual housekeeping tips. We record this session, and we will be sending a link to that recording next week. We absolutely would love your questions as much as we can get to. For those we don't get to, we'll do our best to answer them on the LinkedIn FSMA Fridays group. For your privacy, you'll only see panelists. But as always, we have quite the number of people joining us today. And if you have trouble hearing with WebEx, the automatic via your computer speaker, but we encourage you to use the call-in number as needed. So with that, delighted to have our FSMA Fridays tag team on with us. Rolando Gonzalez, welcome back. It's been a little hiatus since you've been on FSMA Fridays. Delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you, Jill. Happy to be back with FSMA Fridays and the audience.
Absolutely. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce to FSMA Fridays, but certainly not new to the industry, nor to the Acheson Group, but Eric Edmunds. Him and I had the pleasure of meeting at ISP, and delighted to welcome to his first FSMA Fridays. Good morning, Eric.
Morning. Thank you, Jill.
Absolutely. Very delighted to have both of you. Thank you. We'll keep these moving and energized, and again, encourage questions. You can put them into the Q&A tab as we go along here. But I would say let's go ahead and get started. And with that, as we always do, let's share what's the latest and greatest with FSMA this past month. Rolando, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely, Jill. Yeah, and I can think of at least three things that are, in my mind regarding what's new, what's latest around FSMA. Last month, pretty much on the 18th, we had the compliance date for small businesses for human food rule. In addition to that, two other components of the preventive controls rule for animal food became enforceable at the time. So for small businesses, the current manufacturing practices, or cGMPs, and then pretty much for large businesses, the preventive controls requirements within that rule. And we definitely at TAG have seen an increase in the number of companies seeking help around that. So that's great to see that they're preparing and making sure they're ready for compliance with those. Now, about a week ago, FDA released some draft guidance on both the animal food cGMPs, and then also the FSMA solely engaged exemption. Let's recall, though, that draft guidance status means that this represents the current thinking of the agency, and as such, it's open for comments. There's actually a 180 days comment period associated with that. But at this time, these are non-binding to either the agency or the company. So, in other words, companies can choose an alternate way or approaches to align with those expectations of the agency. In the case of the animal food cGMPs document, it's a 50-page document, very large. It's aimed at helping the animal food companies determine if they are subjected to the cGMP requirements within the animal food rule. And it pretty much provides an explanation and recommendations for meeting those requirements. That actually includes a self-assessment at the end of the document, which help facilities evaluate if they're in compliance with those. From the solely engaged exemptions guidance, that's a shorter document. It's about 8 pages. Remember, the solely engaged Act refers to the holding and transportation of raw agricultural commodities, or RACs. That doesn't include fruits and vegetables. It's the storage of unexposed packaged food and activities related, like nuts, some of the other commodities. It does explain that, emphasizes the concept of solely engaged, meaning that you are exclusively working on those activities in order for the facility to be, to qualify for those exemptions, which could be either on the side of the cGMPs and or the preventive controls requirements. So in order for the facility to qualify for any of these, they need to be, again, solely engaged in those, okay? And if they're engaged in other activities that do not fall under the ones that qualify for the exemptions, then they will be covered by either one or both, obviously, depending on which activities they are. There's a concise table, very short, nice table at the end of the document that helps summarize that. But I think an example is always good. So they actually do have a few examples within the document. They say, for example, a grain elevator that holds grains, the rats, pretty much for animal or human food use, they do not engage in any other activities that will be covered by the cGMPs or the parental controls. So in that case, they are exempt from both. However, if that same facility also has a feed mill that manufactures animal food, for example, animal food, then they are not solely engaged in, in the activities that qualify them for the exemption. Therefore, they will be subjected to both of them, cGMPs and parental controls requirements. So again, I suggest that if your industry is along those lines, take a look at the document. I think it helps clarify, and that was the intent of the agency, obviously, to clarify that. And then one more thing, this week, actually, FDA released a very nice document. It's a timeline, a compliance timeline document. I think we have a slide about that, Jill.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that slide, I know that it won't be readable to the audience. There is the link down there where you can find it. Actually prints best as like a legal size document, but it pretty much details the dates for compliance of the FSMA rules and the different elements of different timelines associated with them. So, and with that, the thing that I can say about updates as well. I mean, with these things that we talk about, there might still be companies. In our experience, we still see companies there in need of help for putting together their food safety plan, or they're simply not sure if they're fully aligned with the FDA expectations, or maybe just have some specific questions. So let's remember that there are some resources out there available. In fact, one of the most recent ones that the FDA put out there was the food safety plan builder. The next slide, thank you for that. Just shows you the introductory to the first page there where you have to register and all of that, and then get access to download the document. I mean the program. Sorry, it's actually a computer program that you download as a standalone application in your computer, and it allows you to enter information related to the food safety plan, and eventually your food safety systems that eventually come out with a food safety plan as the final product of the outcome of it. The feedback from some of our clients has been that, it can be kind of laborious. You have to enter a ton of information, of course. One will not provide that to you because they don't know how your operation works. And like with any other electronic tool, the quality of that product in the end will depend, of course, heavily on the information that you put into it and how good it is. I also wanted to mention, a compliant food safety plan depends a lot on conducting a good hazard analysis to begin with. So the intent of this program is not to replace the expertise and the judgment of your PCQI. And the FDA also says clearly that there is also no guarantee that the outcome of it will, have your FSP or food safety plan completely aligned with the expectations of the agency. So it's a tool to complement the resources out there. We know about the other ones, the Technical Assistance Network, the Food Safety Parental Controls Alliance with good educational resources, and group of experts such as TAG, which can always help you, get there faster and have a fresh set of eyes look at how prepared you are. So that's pretty much what I can think of, Jill, in terms of updates. And, back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, Eric, I think you had some other things you might want to share as well.
Yeah, and I was going to start off by saying Rolando covered everything really well. I was just going to retouch on a couple things. That compliance deadline, as you mentioned, it's not something you can read on the slide deck, but it's really the first time the FDA has put every single compliance deadline on a single piece of paper. So it's really helpful in seeing how everything falls into place. the different compliance deadlines depending on your different suppliers and how your business size relates to different business sizes, et cetera. But the new guidance that Rolando mentioned, especially the solely engaged, I found that's the short one, which is only 8 pages, is really useful for a lot of those companies that are doing low-risk activities. Companies that thought they were getting kind of dragged into an extensive regulation and didn't necessarily see the reason why. And even there's really great information there for some people out there that I know have been just dying for information from the FDA, such as seed companies that are using seed screenings that go to animal food. Although they're not really meant to be a food company, they do have human or byproducts that are going to animal feed, and those really provide some really great answers for those low risk products. And even though they are the guidance that's out there for their draft guidance is out there waiting for comments and everything, it does give a really great example of exactly what the FDA is thinking right now. And if there is something that you disagree with, there's always an opportunity to get your voice heard and make comments during this time. But for the moment and probably in the future, it will reflect something that's very close to what the FDA is thinking and will continue to think for the near future at least. But
well, and I have,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was done, you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've just a couple quick comments here. One, of course, these links we will put in the follow-up email. We had a chance to look at them yesterday when Rolando and Eric sent them over, and definitely very succinct, so I think that was appreciated. The other quick things I was just going to sort of follow up with Rolando, you know, as far as that milestone date in September, I'm just curious with that, did your team see an uptick as far as, I won't call frantic calls, but sort of inquiry calls because of that fairly large milestone for FSMA?
Absolutely, Jill. Yes, we've seen that, and I would say that, yep, some of those may have been frantic, but fortunately, many of them are actually proactive as well. And yes, particularly, obviously, the small businesses looking for help around that. And, you know, we see many companies out there that are in just, you know, the right track. They're just looking to make sure that a second set of eyes can take us over their programs. And I mean, that's a good strategy, right? Before the FDA visits them and just having a second opinion. So, yep, we've definitely seen that.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I know TAG is really good about putting these on their website as well. So we will continue on that, you know, as far as providing links and so forth. I will ask my marketing manager, Faye, if you could push to the next slide, please. That would be great. We'll go ahead and continue the dialogue here. Just regards to, one second, please. Oh, looks like I'm back in. So I can go ahead and do that. We were talking about sort of trends with FSMA, and that's sort of been the folder of our conversations with FSMA Fridays in general. But I know, you know, Eric, and I'll have you sort of kick us off here. You know, it looks like we're changing a little bit of shift here, right? You know, we're getting more into the FSMA area of educate why you regulate. Will you share that with the audience and share your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's kind of the evolution of the regulation, I think. Basically, while we were still in the rule proposal time, and even when the rules were finalized, but not no compliance deadlines had passed, the terminology that was commonly used was educate before you regulate. And then when the first compliance came out in September of 2016, it transition to educate before and while you regulate. And now with this new compliance deadline of last September and kind of this new format that FDA is putting out the compliance deadlines in a clearer fashion than they ever have before, we are seeing the transition, in my opinion, to educate while you regulate. There's no educate before now. It's there. If FDA shows up at your door, they're not there necessarily to be your best friend. Of course, they're not there to get you either. They're there to protect public health and food safety. But it's kind of the rubber's hitting the road at this point where they expect people to understand the requirements and what's going on. especially the larger businesses that have had an entire year to comply with the human food rules. And they are sending out their inspectors just as frequently as possible. And we've seen some of the reports from the Government Accountability Office that actually says they are on track to meet all the high risk and low risk facilities within the 5- and 7-year mandated timelines that were originally set in FSMA. So they're really getting out there, seeing everyone, and they want everyone to realize that this isn't a slow transition anymore. It's here, and it's here to stay.
No, thank you for that. And I don't know, Rolando, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. The one thing I'll mention, Rolando, I just got a message. I can hear you very clearly, but a few people indicate that you're a little garbled. So if you have anything to comment, let's see if we can fix that as well. Anything on that part as far as our evolved now into this phase?
No, actually, when I see this, Jill, to be honest with you, one thing that I remember is at the University of Minnesota here, where I am based, we have within the School of Public Health, and obviously the mission of the agency, there is a course entitled, taught by regulators, entitled Eat, Pray, and Regulate. So it kind of, you know, kind of rhymes with this educate while you regulate, you know, as part of where the agency is tending to move now.
Yeah. Well, and I'll have to pipe in with a comment by one of an anonymous comment. I'll call that, you know, but I see that the industry is, especially when FSMA was looming as opposed to now here, it's done, I think, a phenomenal job of trying to self-educate, really understand and learn and participate with FDA. The comment someone threw in was, you know, FDA educate why they regulate is fine, except their inspectors are, I'll call it learning. That wasn't quite the phrase that was used, but that they're still trying to learn about the industry practices, and that the FDA also needs quite a bit more education. So I do think it's a reciprocal sort of thing going on, and that's why educate is on both sides. Would you agree with that, Eric?
Completely. That's actually a really good point, because if anyone has taken the PCQI Preventive Controls Qualified Individual class in the last 2 years, it's likely that they've had those FDA inspectors in the class with them. Everyone's kind of learning side by side now. And then on top of that, FDA is only recently transitioning to having someone who specializes in food. At that point, it's still not someone who specializes in seafood or some other processes. They have the food specialists and they have produce specialists. But yeah, I think there's a big opportunity for for education between both industry and the regulators together at this point.
Yeah, and that's why these dialogues are great. FSMA Fridays and certainly everything else that's out there for the industry. Well, why don't we go ahead and just talk a little bit about, we could touch on, certainly there's more warning letters that are going on, and there are a couple of recalls. I think, Eric, we're going to follow up on this and just touch on it.
Yeah, these were kind of falls straight into line of FDA is enforcing their regulations. And in one of these cases, I guess the recall that I'll mention, it's a USDA FSIS, but FDA kind of treats the situation the exact same. The warning, some of the ones that I've seen that are really interesting lately, and it's not directly related to FSMA, it's actually more related to the nutrition facts compliance deadline, the nutrition facts labeling, which we've seen FDA has been really active in that area as well. But FDA has actually recently taken enforcement action, or at least warning letters, for companies declaring minerals in improper quantities. So that's something that in the past we all know that allergens that is undeclared typically have a recall, especially if they're one of the major food allergens or something like that, or warning letters. But we don't see FDA coming out on the nutrition facts side. And if you read the warning letters around these nutrition facts enforcement actions, you actually see they say, oh, and by the way, you should already know that the new nutrition facts label has been published, and that you can already be complying with it, but we notice you're not. type of thing. So they kind of have extra stuff in there saying, yeah, we're doing more, the regulations are coming down the line, and we gave you the opportunity to comply now. We found this other issue, and now we're just giving you reminders in your warning letter that, yeah, you should be moving towards these new labels, and kind of staying ahead of the game. The recall that I was thinking of is just a recall that you don't see very often, and USDA, FSIS, and the FDA translate coconut in the same way, which is it is potentially an allergen, and for some people, although it's a very rare one, but it's included if you see the major 8 allergens, tree nuts being one of the 8, and coconut is included in that area, even though it's not a tree nut by any botanists or biological standard. However, it does have nut in its name, and it does grow in a tree, but it doesn't have the same health impact as many of the other 8 major allergens. But a major recall has happened recently for undeclared coconut milk, basically, is what happened.
Oh, interesting.
So some interesting things happening, some recalls and warnings that you don't see every day that are coming around. But then there's still all the typical recalls and warnings that you have been used to over the last few years that are still coming around as well.
Now, and quite a few large ones that I know this audience is very acutely aware, but it's interesting when you pulled out the mineral and the coconut, that's something that certainly wasn't on my radar as well. So that's interesting. Anything to add to that, Rolando?
No, I fully align there with Eric, Jill. I mean, that's what we're seeing from the field. So, you know, these things are not necessarily indicative that would be the final position of the agency. But, you know, we start seeing some indication along those lines.
No, absolutely. Well, I think that kind of goes back to what you were talking about with field 2. We thought as we, for the last part of conversation for today's session, is just really sort of trending. Again, the Acheson Group and all the consultants and all of you are just out there, you know, every day, understanding, learning, experiences, and so forth. I know there were 3 specific areas, Rolando, if you want to sort of kick off here, and I know Eric had some input as well, just sort of what you're seeing out there, sort of trends. And again, Rolando, if you could speak, you know, a little bit of garbled still, so we'll see if we can get you a little bit clearer this time.
Okay, sounds good, Jill, and I apologize. You know, we're going through a snowstorm here in Minneapolis this morning, so I'm assuming that the connection might be a little, you know, less robust than usual.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely. You know, we as a group collectively, we are out there on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. We see a good number of facilities, of course, from all different platforms. And, you know, the voice of those companies collectively has allowed us to realize at least three things that are happening frequently here associated with these 3 items that you listed there. And in the case of training, for example, we're seeing that FDA is actually walking into facilities and asking for training records right off the bat. And that's a little different than, you know, what we expected before the rules became enforceable. Because at the time, the expectation was that the FDA was not going to ask for those records unless some red flags became evident, such as, you know, issues with the adequacy of their food safety plan, or anything that they saw in the rest of the documentation or as they walk through the facility. But they're actually doing that. So what do we recommend at TAG? Well, make sure that you have those the records readily available, including the PCQI certificate if you have that, and or any other documentation that supports the training and qualifications of that person that you have designated as the PCQI, particularly if you rely just on training, education, and experience, which is one of the routes that you can take. I mean, you don't have to go and stick to the class, of course, the PCQI class. And then let's not forget the trainings for the rest of the people, the qualified individuals, those who handle food, which the FDA says, well, they need to have at least training in topics such as food hygiene, and then training associated with the specific job function that they perform at the facility. And we know that many companies, you know, HR, the Human Resources Department, keeps track of that. So make sure that those are accessible to the FDA in a reasonable amount of time. The second one, you know, we listed it here as FDA documentation, and I will talk specifically about photo taking by the FDA, taking photographs as they conduct investigations in the facilities. Their operations manual calls out, I mean, they say that they can actually do that. It actually instructs them to just bring their camera just as they will bring any other inspection tool, a paper and a, you know, a pencil and a piece of paper, and then take it out and start taking pictures as they need to do so without having to ask management for authorization to do that. I mean, the management at the facility level. You know, in that case, obviously companies have two options. They can just be okay with it and allow the auditor to take the pictures, or they can enforce a no photo or recording device or whatever it is policy if they have one. But we do have also some recommendations about that. You know, in the case of allowing the auditor to take the pictures, well, think about, you know, pick your battles, right? Is that one that you really want to fight? I mean, is there something that you really, is there a concern of why you don't want the agency to take those pictures? Maybe if not, just escort the auditor, the inspector, make sure that you know, you're aware of the fact of the places where they're taking those photos. And something that we've recommended to companies at times is maybe take pictures alongside with them, and perhaps just you know, expanding the scope of the shot, just in case if there are questions later on, or if the FDA wants to use those eventually for some enforcement action, that you can help provide some additional context to the evidence that they've gathered. And then, you know, the second option is obviously, well, then do not allow the auditor, based on your policy, to take pictures. Ensure that that policy, though, was clearly communicated to the auditor right away when you sat down the first time with them, as the meeting began or the inspection began, including what are the reasons for that, right? It could be as simple as, well, there is some trade secret that we cannot want to reveal. There is, you know, some business confidential information. Will put the company in a, let's say, a competitive disadvantage. That's okay. I mean, but you have to communicate that at the very beginning, explaining as well that your intention is not to impede the investigation or to, you know, interfere with that in any way. Ensure that the policy as well has been applied equally, right? So, well, you know, if you have allowed customers to go through some other entities, why not the regulators then? That would raise a red flag, of course. And the last recommendation we have about that is definitely engage your legal counsel. The FDA may cite some U.S. court case decisions that they feel allow them the right to do so, and you know, they have the power to do so. Some legal experts think that that may not be the case. That's why you have to engage your legal counsel in that regard. And then the last trend that we've seen here, Jill, is definitely the environmental monitoring programs. The FDA, as they walk into facilities, they're also paying a lot of attention to the EMPs. Remember that there is a very specific situation where it requires environmental monitoring, ready-to-eat food that is exposed to the environment, and an environmental pathogen has been identified as a hazard that needs control in that environment, and that food does not receive any other treatment before packaging. That's very specific. So, however, ensure then that that program is aligned with the seek and destroy strategy. In other words, I mean, the intent, what you want to do is find that pathogen if it's present in that facility, and strive to know via the program if you have a problem. Do not wait until the FDA comes to your facility and tells you, you know what, you have a problem here. That is the preventive approach that you to see. And in the end, just seek resources, you know, additional resources, publications, help from experts. If you need any help, ensuring that the program is adequate. So, I mean, those are the three things that I can think of that at the top of the list have come up in the FDA visits to our clients' facilities and what we recommend companies to, or how to approach it.
No, thank you for that. I know environmental monitoring has certainly been a hot topic, certainly this year, quite a bit. We've talked about that, but I do find it interesting, you know, the photography angle. I know within our customers, they certainly document quite a bit, you know, as far as internal audits or just, you know, proof of a product before it was shipped out, things like that. So it's interesting, conversely, it's going the other way. So anything to add on that, Eric, that you want to share?
Not specifically. I think, I mean, the EMPs is a major issue, and that's related around one of those other guidance documents that says some things that make kind of change industry standards. So it's one that people are struggling with. And then as far as pictures in a facility, that's a difficult topic that has to be kind of addressed and thought through long before the inspection occurs. So yeah, they're both two areas where you can't solve them overnight necessarily or figure it out overnight, but you have to be thinking about it now.
Yeah, thank you for that. As I always find these, certainly each month I learn a lot, and I think, you know, audience-wise, it's just so interesting to think about what's trending, if you will, and I think that's sort of a good idea as far as moving forward with FSMA Fridays. You know, what you all are seeing in the field. We've gotten some comments back, a couple questions we'll do our best to address on our FSMA Fridays LinkedIn group because it is the bottom of the hour. We do try to stay very close to the time, so I appreciate everyone still hanging on. Just a couple of other things too. I believe at this point many of you have certainly took part in the TAG and Safety Chain survey about operations, food safety and quality operations, but the report is now ready, and if you haven't received it, we'll go ahead and include a link as well. Some interesting peer responses, but I think when it comes to FSMA, and sort of a theme that we talked about today, certainly just in regards to understanding if your food safety plan is meeting the regulations, and it still says about, you know, a quarter of the folks who participated, you know, still haven't done that gap assessment. But what we found interesting was more than half have not gone externally just to do sort of an audit of your food safety plan and review, which is always a key piece of it. And then certainly I know PCQI training has you know, more vastly available, and it's not everyone has to do it, but we did find it interesting that at least a third have not done that at this juncture. So with that, and again, we had quite a few questions that came in. We'll do our best to answer that. As always, I am, you know, the Acheson Group is a great resource in helping with these monthly sessions as well, but the team is out there and is very in touch with all the trends and certainly the backbone of understanding what needs to be accomplished in helping companies. So I encourage you to reach out, and again, links to things we've talked about are always posted on their site. And of course, I would be remiss not to mention Safety Chain. We're very proud of our operations platform and the ability to be more effectively managing your programs, which helps with FSMA compliance. So with that, wow, another very informative session. I really appreciate everyone standing by and being with us today. Absolutely encourage people to sign up for the TAG newsletter. All of us here at Safety Chain read it regularly. And then also if you're any of these upcoming events, SQF conference coming up quickly here in Dallas, a Food Safety Consortium, I urge you to stop by and say hello to Safety Chain, and TAG is often there as well. So with that, Rolando, I do hope you survive your snowstorm, and I know you know, I appreciate your time. And then Eric, I know that you've taken your time out of your busy schedule as well, so I really appreciate both your time today. It's a great FSMA Friday session.
Thank you, Jill. Always a pleasure.
Excellent. And again, thank you everyone for joining, and happy FSMA Fridays.
Have a great day.